Hello, I'm Justin Byrne. I've just finished my research degree at Newcastle University where I researched the effects of woodland ageing. During that time I got to spend a lot of time at Gosforth Nature Reserve and really enjoy the wildlife in the trees. Today let's talk through winter tree identification. We'll go through the buds, bark, twigs and all of the things that you need to be able to identify trees in the winter. Let's get started.
So here we have Hazel, Corylus avellana.
It's really an essential tree to Britain. It's been so important for our culture, our building materials, tool making, and that's because it naturally coppices. It forms these broad stools, which you can see here, that spread out with multiple stems. The tree can be identified by its short stature, spreading out in the understory in these multi-stem stools, but also by its bark, which in older trees is peeling and papery, often a bronze or grey colour. In younger trees, the bark may be smoother, as you can see here. In younger trees, the rods are about the size of your thumb, but as the tree gets older, they get larger. The buds are these round, green buds at the end of twigs and alternating down the twig. The flowers look a lot like the buds. They're also green, but have these eruptions of red petals, which look very striking at this time of year. The catkins are these hanging yellow bunches on the twigs. They should be really easy to see at this time of year.
This is Downy Birch, Betula pubescens. The birches are one of the earliest trees to arrive on the British Isles after the glacial period.
It's a tall tree standing out in the forest, characterised by this brown, reddish bark that peels and less deeply fissured. Along the bark you'll see these horizontal lenticles, which are breathing holes for the tree. Downy birch is very shooty, so often you'll see eruptions of shoots, especially lower down the tree. A really great feature to look for are these downy twigs and shoots that you'll see along the tree, accompanied by these small green buds. This tree has a really interesting canker on it, caused by an injury or an infection, but these aren't reliable guides for identifying trees.
Some of these features can be quite hard to distinguish from its cousin the silver birch, even when you're standing next to a silver birch.
Betula pendula, another tall tree in the wood. Silver birch is characterised by these triangular or diamond-shaped black fissures that lessen as you move up the tree. The base of the tree can be almost entirely covered by them, and only peeking through is the white or silver peeling bark and the horizontal lenticles that cover it. Sometimes you'll find a silver birch has a Y shape with two trunks that split somewhere around the breast or shoulder height. Often this is caused by frost damage as it grows.
So if you're having any difficulty with your downy and silver birches, just inside Gosforth Nature Reserve, past the bridge, there are two great examples. And here we have Sycamore, Acer pseudoplantanus.
It stands out in the wood as a tall tree with a single bole. bark of sycamore is often this grey-brown, but can even be pink or purple in some individuals. Mostly the bark is smooth, but as it gets older it develops these plates. Plates are square or round flaking structures that we see on the bark of trees. Underneath these plates we found some spider eggs.
Now sycamore is really easy to identify if you can see the buds, because there's this really strong green bud, the tip bud scale, and then alternating bud scales aside it, sometimes flanked by 2 more green buds.
Often it's easy to identify sycamore just by looking at the leaves left over from last year. In the summer you will have seen these dark black spotted leaves, and they remain on the leaf litter.
Holly, Ilex aquifolium. This one's not going to be too hard for you even in winter because it's in leaf all year round. And if you come at this time of year, in the early spring, you're going to start to see the flowers coming in too. So that'll be a nice treat.
Even though the leaves are tough, holly supports lots of life, and you can always find the tracks of leaf miners if you look closely. The flies of these leaf miners lay their eggs just below the surface of the leaf, and then the young grow inside the leaf, eating out small tunnels. Leaf miners are a bit of a pest, but overall they're part of the rich tapestry of the ecosystem.
I'm not going to get too close to the bark for obvious reasons, but if you do catch a glimpse of it, you're expecting to see something that's a kind of brownish grey with a rough texture. Now let's go on to something else. Ash tree, Fraxinus excelsior.
It's a tall, dominant tree in the woodland that is excellent for timber and for making tools. Ash has this really characteristic grey, rough, ridged bark, especially in older trees. The pattern of ridging can really be quite striking. On this tree the ridges are less deep than some other examples, but no less clear. Sometimes the branches of the ash tree droop and swoop like a chandelier, making it very easy to tell it apart. Although bear in mind, this also happens to the horse chestnut. In winter and spring, the black buds of the ash tree are a good way of separating it from other trees. Typically you'll see a large bud at the tip of the twig, flanked by a pair of black buds, and then in pairs down the twig, more black buds. In younger trees, the bark isn't so rough, so keep an eye out for that.
Now we come to Beech, Fagus sylvatica. These 2 trees are very old, mature specimens. They've got this light grey-brown texture, and often they're very smooth. This one started to develop a rugged texture, and in younger trees they can be very, very smooth. But in their old age they tend to become gnarled and cracked, but not deeply so and not ridged, as you can see in the tree behind me.
The roots of the beech tree are often very prominent, looking not dissimilar from buttress roots that you see in tropical trees. On a hillside, these can look very interesting, almost like somebody's poured the roots down the slope.
Here we have the buds of the beech tree, which are these orange torpedo-shaped buds that you can really clearly identify. They're very distinct. And low on the tree, throughout the year, you should be able to see leaves. Even though it's spring now, last year's leaves are still present on the tree and they've yet to fall. So with beech, you can always see them, and it should make it very easy to identify this very clear, striking orange.
Ultimately, beech trees can always be spotted for the dense orange leaf litter layer that they leave behind. These leaves decompose incredibly slowly, and the litter that you walk through may be a few years old. The litter will consist of orange, boat or oval shaped leaves.
It's important to remember that although these trees have huge amounts of mass above ground, below ground there's only really a small amount of material anchoring it to the surface of the earth. In this fallen beech tree, nearly all of that material is exposed.
My research was looking into the interactions between trees and the bacteria and fungi that facilitate their day-to-day life. It's here in the soil, in the space around the roots, and also in the area around the tree where the leaves decompose, that those interactions are built up. These roots are quite woody or lignified, and they no longer really take up water themselves, but instead they act like an artery for the water that's collected by the finer roots. These finer roots also outsource some work to symbiotic fungi called mycorrhiza. These mycorrhiza collect nutrients for the trees without the trees expending energy, and in return they're paid with sugar from the tree's leaves. The upper surface is a rich organic layer made of decaying material and is very biologically active. As you move deeper, there's less biological activity and less nutrients.
Alder, Ulmus glutinosa. It's a really good example, although it is quite young. They do get much bigger than this, because you can see the wonderful catkins that stay this colour all the way through the winter, and the seed cones all over the tree. Another thing to pay attention to are these horizontal lenticles that make their way down the tree's bark. You can see them maybe better here on this tree. Later on, when it gets older, it might start to form some plates, cracking, but for now, you've just got this really lovely bouquet.
Older buds stick out on these prominent stalks, alternating down the twig. The colour is normally this mauve purple, but can be greyer or duller. The seed cones almost resemble small pine cones, about the size of the tip of your thumb. Alder is such a useful tree. Its charcoal was essential to the gunpowder industry of Britain, and it was often planted in the wet areas that couldn't be used for other trees. Its timber, initially pale, turns a red-orange, almost like bleeding, very quickly. And its natural resistance to rotting in water has made it absolutely essential to the construction of boats and sluices, oars, and other water-related timber structures. Additionally, it's also the best material to make logs out of. Here we have common lime. Tilia europaea is a hybrid between broad and small-leaved lime that's often planted. Typically, lime trees are planted in long rows down avenues, and we often see them in gardens or on driveways, especially in old estates. The bark is a pale grey and slightly ridged, although that can sometimes be difficult to see between the sprouts. Lime has these deep red or wine coloured boxing glove shaped buds that alternate down the twig. We can see here 1 year's growth to the last bud scar, and maybe this is another bud scar here for a short year, not so much growth then, and then back to where it leaves the last twig. And here we have goat willow, Salix caprea. This took me so long to crack, because you always find it out on your walks by rivers, streams, or the banks of a small pond. Much like other willows, it likes water. What I eventually cracked it with was these diamond-shaped pits that you get on the bark in slightly older trees. They take a while to emerge. And as you move down the bark, you find more ridges, rough ridges. Now, in summer, the leaves of these trees are very easy to identify due to a hook on the end of the leaves, or a little kind of swirl. But in winter, once you've got an eye for these notches, you'll know it just fine. So here we have the goat willow twig. There's an apical bud here that's brown, and then spiralling down very close to the twig we have additional buds, brown buds, that emerge. Sometimes they form clusters, like we see on this twig. They're generally not in pairs or alternating on the side, they can spiral down. And here we have 1 year of growth to the last bud scar, and then only a short year before that. Horse chestnut, Asculus hippocastanum. A really lovely example. These things can be quite tricky to identify from the bark alone, which can be rough and craggy, pink brown to red brown in older trees. But these buds and these candelabra-shaped branches are really great to spot them with. As you can see, there's this large brown sticky apical bud with smaller brown nib-shaped buds moving down the branch. If you're not so sure about the buds, then you can always remember the horse chestnut for its horseshoe-shaped leaf scars going down the twig. These leaf scars are shaped like a horseshoe, and they have 3 or 4 dots inside that look like the nails of the horseshoe. Trees in the first few decades of their life are more likely to be smooth than this scaly texture. In the early half of the last millennium, you wouldn't have seen very many horse chestnuts growing in woods. They've been introduced from northern Greece, around Albania. But still, people are very fond of them, and I can see why, especially when you look back at memories of trying to play conkers. If you're very lucky, somewhere on the ground around the tree might be a few conker shells, or even a disregarded conker that nothing's got to yet. Remember, the horse chestnut and the conker tree are the same tree. Well, the trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said, and I've really enjoyed my time today at Gosforth Nature Reserve. I hope you come out and do the same. Try to spot some of the trees we've talked about today. It's not just summer that trees have something to say about their character or their history. Right now they're just waking up and getting ready for a year of activity. It can be quite intimidating to go down to the woods and try and identify trees when you don't know very much about them and they're not in leaf. But as you've seen, there are so many signs that you can use to find out about them. So I suggest grab a good book, and a good few friends and go down to Gosforth Nature Reserve.